Good morning, dear church. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. In today's gospel, Jesus and his disciples are far from their Galilean home base. Despite his preaching and teaching, despite his miraculous works, Jesus has been rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. And John the Baptist, who had proclaimed Jesus to be more mighty than himself, has been executed. And the Pharisees and the scribes have been critical, to say the least. Did Jesus in his humanity leave Galilee because he needed time away? Did he do it because he knew that it would make the Jewish leaders crazy? Or did he do it because it was time to expand his ministry? At any rate, Jesus and his disciples are back in Gentile territory. Recently, they had been in the district of Tyre and Sidon, and we hear about his unusual encounter with a Canaanite woman, an encounter that pivots Jesus away from exclusively reaching out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and to now include the sheep that do not belong to that particular fold. Jesus and his disciples are in Caesarea Philippi, a predominantly pagan place that is home to many temples and shrines to other deities. Chief among those was the temple to the Greek god Pan, who was popular because he was the god of isolated rural areas, music, goat herds, hunting, herding, of sexual and spiritual possession, and of victory in battle, because it was said that Pan could instill panic among the enemy. That is quite a list. Woo. It is in this place, against this backdrop of these pagan temples, against these symbols of empire, that Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Who are people saying that Jesus is? What are people making of this mix of humility and power in this Son of Man? Their responses: John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, maybe one of the prophets. Perhaps Jesus is just one more prophet in a long line of prophets who were divinely appointed by God to bring hope or serve as a spiritual leader or teacher for the people. A prophet who speaks God's will. Up to this point, Jesus has done some remarkable things, and those around him have taken some notice. These comparisons aren't bad. I mean, while Jesus isn't any of these prophets are the all-stars, highly regarded, remembered, and studied. Being a prophet is not a bad thing. We see the prophets as a combination of foretelling and being forthtelling. They condemn at times, it's true, but they also bring the promise of hope and deliverance. They raise our expectations about the future. And then Jesus asks, "But who do you say that I am?" When Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" it is important to note that the you here is plural. Who do you all say that I am? Or where I'm from, who do y'all say that I am? But it is Peter who answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Never have articles been more important. Jesus is not a Messiah, but the Messiah. Jesus is not a son of a living God, but the Son of the living God. Now, this is quite a statement from Peter. In the Jewish faith, the Messiah would be the one to restore Israel, which in this context could mean that Israel would be delivered from Roman oppression. Many believe that this would be achieved by any means necessary, and in all likelihood, it would require tremendous amounts of force and violence. It would require armies and lots of fighting and maybe even some collateral damage. The Messiah of the Jewish people would be a conquering king. The Messiah of the Jewish people would be merciless and ruthless. Are these our expectations for the Messiah? Today, when we consider our world of war, oppression, and want, do we hope for an eye or a tooth for a tooth? To give some people what we think they truly deserve? It's tempting, isn't it? But Jesus has not done much of anything up to this point that could be described as Messiah-like, at least in the minds of the community and the disciples. He has come from humble beginnings. He has lifted up the downtrodden and the poor. He's preached about loving enemies. He has healed people with physical ailments and people possessed by demons. His healing touch has been offered to people in need regardless of where society has placed their value. He even reached out to those outside of the in-group. He has fed the hungry and shared a table with society's outcast. He has not spoken of abolishing the law and yet has at times reinterpreted it. These things are all good, all powerful things, but none of them screams world domination. None of them screams deliverance. And yet, the disciples, most of them anyway, are witnessing something happening here, something different. A messiahship that is going to deliver people through reconciliation and restoration. Dominion, not domination. It is an awakening of sorts, a realization that the dominion of heaven is not as we might create in humankind, selective, awkward, unkind, and at times thuggishly protected, but as Jesus taught in the parables, a place that celebrates the last and the least, a place that bears fruit from the smallest seed, a place where judgment is not ours to mete out, but something that God can and will address. And a God not of a few things like Pan and those of his cohort, but the God of all things. Are these our personal expectations for the Messiah? Is this what we hope for? Can we put aside our tendencies to exclude, criticize, and put ourselves first in these hopes and expectations? And as the church, are these our expectations for the Messiah? Can we embrace dominion as justice, acceptance, inclusion, equity, and love? Jesus' response to Peter is unforgettable. Not only has Peter gotten the answer 100% right, but Jesus tells him that on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Opinions vary on Jesus' meaning here. Our siblings in the Roman Catholic faith consider this rock to be Peter. There are some pretty compelling arguments for this based on the study of Aramaic and Greek. But perhaps this rock is not Peter, but Peter's confession. Some have suggested that this rock is public testimony in general, or even the willingness to make a public witness. While we as Christians may not agree on what this rock is, we can agree that this rock from which we are hewn contains the promises of a true Messiah. And as Isaiah writes, this Messiah will teach and send out justice that will be a light for the peoples. And while things as we know them will pass away, this Messiah's salvation will be forever, and this Messiah's deliverance will never end. No matter how we may want to define the meaning of this rock, it is more clear when Jesus talks about building the church, which is the first time that this word appears in the Bible, specifically a congregation or assembly. What Jesus is building is not going to depend entirely on one person. Our faith has Abraham, but he was but one when the Lord called him, blessed him, and made him many. And yes, Peter figures prominently, and of course will go on to great things, but he does not do this alone. If Peter received the keys, it is the church that is built on the rock. And what a comfort to know that our faith does not depend entirely on the achievements of these two men, which is good because, quite frankly, they were far from perfect. but depends instead on a merciful God who loved them and who is the same merciful God who loves us. And what are we going to do about it? This was the very question that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Rome. How do we respond to the mercy that God has given us through the grace that we have received through Jesus' death and resurrection? Paul wrote the church that it was fitting to present ourselves as a living sacrifice, not something to be thrown on an altar to be obliterated, but to accept the gifts given graciously to us from the Spirit and live lives discerning what is good and acceptable and perfect, as this is the will of God. And what is good and acceptable and perfect is not our life-limiting ways of sin, which we inflict on ourselves and others, but on the life-giving transformation that we get from the cross. We will, at times, in our sinful imperfections, want to respond in ways that I think those early followers of Jesus expected while they waited and hoped for a Messiah, vengeance, or the ultimate payback. But as Paul writes, what is holy and acceptable to God is not to be conformed to the age and what we think is expected of it, but to be transformed, to think beyond our limited selves and our base desires and discern what God wills for us. Love for God, love for ourselves, love for our neighbor. That is the love that God has for us, and it changes everything. So, when we are asked, "Who do you say that I am?" what do we expect? What do we confess? Let us proclaim along with Peter, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And may God's never-ending mercy and love for us continue to transform our lives today and always. Amen.